Our next session is Building the Savanna for the Lion, creating tenant ecosystems that lease themselves. We'll be joined by Paul Stanton, who is the head of strategy at Equiem. Welcome, Paul. Yeah. Make sure that.
There you go. Yeah, I think we've got it. Okay, nice to see everyone. Paul Stanton, as he said, head of strategy at Equiem. And this will probably be a little dessert for your brains, and also a nice follow-up to what was just discussed around tenant engagement. So, this conversation, in my background, just very quickly, I've been on the real estate private equity side, investing in office, as well as the prop tech side, as well as the flexible office side. Like to think I have a relatively balanced understanding of kind of old school and new school, and where we're going and why. I think what's really interesting is the fact that, supply-demand dynamics in our industry have been such that we haven't really had to ever design office buildings around a user. We've always just, designed amenities, design services generally around a market, what the market demanded, rather than thinking about them for any type of specific user. So, the way I like to think about the future of office buildings and the skill set that it's going to require is really akin to the idea of an ecosystem. Calling this Building the Savanna for the Lion. I guess I need one of these, right? Yes. There it is. So let's go back to, third or fourth grade for a second and remember what an ecosystem is. And really an ecosystem is about, the way animals and their environment interact. And there's typically an apex predator, so in this case, a lion, around a savanna, and then there are all of these, other secondary players, secondary animals that feed into the food chain, and then you have the flora, the fauna, the climate, et cetera, that makes the ecosystem possible. And what's exciting about ecosystems is the fact that once you get them right, they're self-sustaining. So they are really, if you apply that to real estate, the idea that you would not have to continue leasing once you create an ecosystem that worked for any type of specific user. I think the challenge today, but the opportunity is going to be creating buildings that really are user-focused. Like everything else in this world, Nike doesn't create a shoe just randomly. They focus it on a very specific user. And in the same way, we'll start to think about buildings in that same way. But this is how we think about buildings today, and this is what I think of when I think about how we're designing ecosystems. They really aren't for anyone. We literally look around a market and we see, whatever shit the other person put in the building next to us, and then we add on top of that. So we're throwing ice cream socials and ping pong tables and video games without any real understanding of who the user is. And I think as we, continue to, office buildings are being forced to compete with the home office, I can get a treadmill at home or around the corner. I can play video games on my phone. I don't play ping pong that much. Golf simulators are cool, but I'd rather be on the course, and ice cream I can get in my fridge too, and beer's cool. But there's no theme to any of this, and there's no real differentiation. So what would it look like? Oh, that was back. This is forward. What would it look like if we did think about the office as an ecosystem? We thought about it, from a primary user perspective and secondary users, and then what are the amenities and services that are needed that actually support this ecosystem such that they can improve upon themselves. So this is one example. This is a rough rudimentary example, but let's take an architecture firm to begin with. And there's this whole community of different companies within a building that would benefit and see symbiosis from being in the same building together. So you've got an architect, you've got an interior designer that works with an architect, you've got a brand agency, you've got hospitality consultants. This was just helpful in that there were only 3 boxes, but there are a number of other users that would all see synergies with being around an architect. And then on top of that, there are services that, beyond, having a ping pong table and ice cream, which I don't need to leave my house for, things that I could actually come to the building to use that would change my workday experience. So I don't really know that much about architecture, but 3D printing is something that's needed to build models, high-end commercial grade models, having a photo studio to stage different themes, free beer just because it would be nice to have free beer along with everything. But there's so many other things that we can be bringing to this, different services, continuing education, et cetera, that continue to make this community more interesting. So now bringing this back to the Tenant Experience app for a second, I think it's really relevant what they were just talking about and what some of you asked about around engagement. And really, the Tenant Experience app is, at the end of the day, a direct digital reflection of the physical ecosystem of the building. So yes, it is great at connecting the services and amenities to the users in the building and then giving feedback back to the owner about whether or not it's working. But if you're just throwing in video games and treadmills and hoping that that's going to create engagement, there's nothing that the tenant experience app can really do to really move the needle. And I think that's a struggle with tenant experience apps and landlords today, is just an aside, is this expectation that once you put the tenant experience app in the building, it's just going to run itself, as was just talked about. So, but how does that look different? What is the value of that tenant experience app to, a random employee versus, someone that fits within the architect community and is able to come into a building and, experience these services and connect with this community during the day? So, that's a great example, but, where do we go from here? I mean, we have buildings that are, 80% full or 50% full. We can't just empty them out and, start an ecosystem from scratch. So, how do we do this over time? And I do believe that this is going to become one of, if not the core skill set in the future, for tenant retention and successful office buildings. So going back again to, third or fourth grade and remembering the scientific method, it's gather data, form a hypothesis, and then test a hypothesis, and then iterate. And I really, and that's how ecosystems work fundamentally. And I think this is the way that office buildings should work in the future. So where do you start from gathering data? It would be great if everybody had Equiem in their building, and you had data on who was there and who was using the amenities. But short of that, it's really starting with a stacking plan and starting to understand the puzzle pieces of who's in the building. Who are my apex predators, my top tenants, what industries are in the building, what are the themes, and then from a data perspective, which employees from which of these tenants are coming to the building every day, which ecosystem, who in this ecosystem is being supported. And then, surveys. This is something that I think, everyone is tired of being surveyed throughout the COVID period, but I think there is an opportunity here to, really align with the tenant community and not just send them more surveys, but be able to articulate to them what you're doing for them and how you're going to build this together. And again, something that can be delivered through tenant experience platforms. And then lastly, looking at market data, understanding comps, understanding what's happening around you in your neighborhood, who are the industries that are moving in, and who are those apex predators and the primary users around them that you might start focusing on to begin thinking about an ecosystem. So now that we've got the data, we can start forming a hypothesis. So again, keeping with this neat little diagram, filling in who is that primary user. Are they, is it legal firms? Is it insurance firms? Is it financial services? Is it more tech and media? Then building the secondary users around it, thinking through, who are those other groups that we can be bringing in to support this primary user. And then lastly, amenities and services. What are the amenities and services that this group needs, like the architect, to really have the workplace be of value to them and have the shared services in the building be of value beyond just something that, makes it less shitty to work there on a regular basis. And then, being able to take that hypothesis and put it into a digital framework and be able to display it in a way that, the market and your building community can understand. And again, being able to do this through a tenant experience platform, and if not a tenant experience platform, through a building website, to really be able to lay out and say, this is the brand of the building, this is who this is for, to start getting feedback. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, and this is a real art, is how do you test it with different, without investing millions of dollars into, capital improvements in a building, how are we, starting to, do pop-up services and pop-up events and bring different things into the building based around this thesis of who the primary users are, to see if people are coming back to the building for these things, to see if it's engaging tenants, and understanding who's engaging, who's coming. And again, all of this, thanks to, different technology platforms, specifically tenant experience, you can start gathering all of this data and start getting a much better understanding of what's working. So lastly, you've laid out kind of this new hypothesis of services and who you're targeting and what the brand of the building looks like. Now it's rolling it out and actually getting feedback. So, it's letting tenants know that you listened to them, that you weren't just sending them a survey for no reason. You actually took everything back, you digested it, and you're sharing it with them. And now you're really excited to share, this is what the future of the building starts to look like. So allowing them to beginning to interact with the building. I think there's so many great ways now through digital marketing tools to be, pushing this out to the market and targeting specific companies. So depending on who your primary users are, depending on who your secondary users are, you can very easily use LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and be sending this, targeting people with ads and sending them different, A/B tests for, services, et cetera, in a building, just to understand our CEOs, our COOs, our heads of people and culture clicking on your ads, and is that becoming attractive? Again, more data, and through tenant experience platforms, through IoT sensors, through access control, really understanding, is that building foot traffic? Are people using different rooms where we're putting on these services and amenities? And is this, is this making them happier? And again, through tenant experience platforms, the ability to judge that, gather NPS scores, et cetera, et cetera. And so ultimately, we do this over the course of a few months. We repeat, we iterate, and then we keep doing it over and over again. And then, that really is the theme of an ecosystem, that it's not going to happen overnight, but over, a year, 2 years, 3 years, we start to seeing, real movement and, real structure around, the theme of the building and how it's meant to service the tenant community. And if we can accomplish all that, we can put leasing on autopilot, we can all go buy a yacht, and we can vacation full time. Thank you.
Yeah, did you want to do any questions, or
yeah? Sure.
You got some time.
Showed up late and didn't know what else I was supposed to be. Yes, please, questions. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're just scratching the surface of this, right? I mean, this is coming out of COVID. We're entering a new world where I think, the way we're thinking about, the support that we're providing alongside the tenant experience platforms is exactly this. But it doesn't, in a multi-tenant building, I think this is where if I'm answering your question correctly, I think this is where the greatest opportunity exists. But in reality, you're sitting around with 60, 70 companies and trying to understand different demands of each of them. And so I guess in a utopian world, right, you can just dump push anyone that doesn't fit the mold of whatever the ecosystem is built for out, and you move the tenants lining up outside in. But that's not realistic. So, it really is just, a slow process that I'm suggesting over time is, understanding the different dynamics of the company. Ultimately, you can't design for everybody. I think that's what, landlords think of when they're putting, amenities in a building. They're trying to say, well, we have to take into account this group and this group and this group and this group. And, what I'm suggesting is you can't do that. If you really want to differentiate yourself, you have to be focused, you have to be divergent, you have to be compelling with something that's very specific for a very specific user group. You can't just do it for everyone. Does that mean that you want to piss off all the tenants that don't fit in that and just, hope that they exit? Obviously not today. So it is, a dance that's going to be, done nimbly. But, I think over time, it's just letting the management know that you do care. You are trying to create an environment for them. And then over time, slowly leaning into what, is surfacing as, the best opportunity. Sure, and I mean, again, I think the data around whether or not you're extending leases is in your leasing software, right? But as far as engagement, back to that slide where I kind of had like the amenities that were just all over the place, and then something that was focused toward a specific community. My argument is that it's really not the job of the tenant experience platform to design that. It's the job of the operator to figure out, form a hypothesis and come up with, this is the user that we're going to focus on, and this is what we're going to deliver them. And then using the tenant experience platform to connect the tenants to those services. Use the data from the tenant experience platform to then understand, how tenants are engaging with it. And then based off of that data, revise your hypothesis and do that, consistently over and over again. And that's why this is very much a forward-thinking conversation. I mean, today as we're, all sitting here with office occupancies, true office occupancy, what it actually is engagement great? No, it's not great in any building, and it's not because of, which tenant experience platform you're using. It's purely because of, geographic issues, where is the building, who are the tenants in the building, and do they think it's worth coming back right now? But this is really an antidote that I'm putting out there in the future for how might we start thinking about using tenant experience apps and different services and amenities in a building today that can start creating more value on these platforms. Any use cases that have driven this engagement in the market? I would defer to my customer success team normally on this to tell me what's happening in any one specific building. But I think, from a case study perspective, really looking toward, I'm going to answer this question in a different way. I mean, I think it's worth really looking at Flex Office right now as a predictor of, what's working and in what areas. And there are some Flex operators that are, using tenant experience platforms to run their services. But I think that's where you're getting more, on the ground data today of use studies of driving engagement and understanding what are the services and amenities from those groups that are bringing individuals back to the office. I think it's too early right now to really understand, to tie companies to any specific engagement or services that's happening in the building, as we're all still going through this process of re-entering. That was my lawyer answer to that question. All right. Anybody else? Great. Thank you.